Hey folks, good morning. It is Sunday morning here in Minnesota, a state that I live in, but I have never flown an aircraft in. Here's our planned route on Navigraph from Duluth Sky Harbor Airport, small general aviation airport just to the southeast of Duluth International. There's monstrous Lake Superior. Routing takes us to Grand Rapids, Minnesota, past Park Rapids, Minnesota, through Detroit Lakes, Minnesota, and on to the 1-8 approach in Fargo, North Dakota. Fargo is the largest airport, as the largest city in North Dakota. It looks like Class Charlie airspace, and it looks like we've got a couple of Class Delta airspaces to transition the Class D in Duluth and the Class D in Grand Rapids. But VOR to VOR is our basic routing of flight. And for some reason, I haven't gotten onto the simulator yet, but for some reason, the simulator thinks that I'm off the coast of Africa down here. So maybe we'll get that rectified once we get into the flight. So let's minimize the Navigraph. Create our flight. I just did this flight a little while ago, so much of this should still be in the configuration screen. Sky Harbor Duluth. We're going to go to parking space number 1, and I'm not going to set a destination. We're going to use live traffic, live conditions, live time of day. Should be drop dead gorgeous, beautiful Payware Airport. Sunrise over Lake Superior. If it's anything like my home state of Washington, which I know it is, because I've been to Duluth several times. Seagulls in Seattle and seagulls in Duluth. Let's push the fly button. While that is firing up, we can get our air traffic controller program fired up. That should also be pre-configured because I just came off of the same flight. We are flying a plane that is an actual registered Cessna. Believe it or not, I trained on this airplane. It's November 747 Echo Charlie. And I could tell all my friends when I was growing up that I was doing my training flights in a 747. Well, yes, the registry number was 747 Echo Charlie, but it was actually a Cessna Skyhawk. Bragging rights, right? Okay, they're invaluable. Here's our air traffic control program. Let's import the flight information that we got in SimBrief. Whoops. I want this on top. Okay, well, what's the way to do this? Okay, we'll do it this way. So our routing is Kilo Delta Yankee Tango, which is the Sky Harbor Airport here in Duluth. DLH is the Duluth VOR. Actually, it's a VORTAC combination, VOR and TACAN. And then it is to GPZ, which is Grand Rapids, Minnesota. And then to Detroit Lakes, DTL. And finally to KFAR. And import. Okay, did I misspell something? KD DYT is our departure, not DLT. KDYT. I think that was my mistake. Just a little typo. Oh, didn't like that one either. Did I? KDYT, DLHGPZ, DTL, KFAR. Gotta get it perfect. Oh, got a double T there. There we go. Now that should fly. That should fly, right? That should fly. Okay. Here's our air traffic control program. You can see our basic routing. Sky Harbor, Duluth, Grand Rapids, Detroit Lakes, Hector International, which is Fargo. We have a expected performance of 500 feet per minute on the climb and the descent. We have a cruise altitude at 6,000 feet, planned ground speed of 85 knots. And time en route, 2 hours and 23 minutes. Wonderful. I think that is as far as we need to go on that. So we'll push that off to the side. Let's minimize that. And push ready to fly. Let's do a quick external check of our craft before we launch it into the ether. Kind of busy on the ground equipment today, isn't it? We are right on the water. Boy, you couldn't get, there's a little dock right out there at the airport. I've never been to this airport, as I mentioned. I've never flown in the state of Minnesota, but I am from Minnesota, and I have been to Duluth many times. It reminds me of my home in Seattle in a lot of ways. The aircraft looks good. Let's climb aboard. Cold and dark. I'm going to try to use my SATAC panels here. I haven't had a lot of success. So I've got to start up an interface program. Okay, maybe that worked. Mixture full rich. Parking brake on. Fuel selector to both. Fuel cutoff to the enable position. Throttle is all the way out. Switches are all off. That's looking good. Let's turn the beacon. Let's see if the beacon switch will come on. The SATAC switches are not working this morning, so I'll have to do it the old-fashioned way, I believe. Yeah, they're not working. Beacon on. Now the beacon isn't going to come on because we don't have master power, master switch on. So we'll turn the master switch on. This happened to me on the last flight where the engine started right away, and I don't like it. I don't know why it started. It's certainly not right. And it's starting again, uncommanded. I don't like that at all. Well, turn the fuel pump on. Give it a few seconds of fuel pump to prime. And then fuel pump off. Let's check the area around the aircraft. We've actually got a little director guy here who's going to help us out. We'll say in an authoritative voice, clear prop! And then we will try to start the prop the correct way. And of course the engine's running. Now my question is, how long will it run? Let's give the throttle just a little bit of throttle. Whoops, just a little bit of throttle. Why are we... Oh, frustrating. Okay. We'll put the nav lights on. Avionics can come on. Let's frequency for Duluth VOR is 112.6. Next is Grand Rapids at 111.4. And next is Detroit Lakes at 111.2. Okay, 111.2 is the third, 112.1 is the first, and 111.4 is the second. Now we can also go ahead and enter a flight plan. First waypoint is Duluth VOR, Vortac DLH. And then it is GPZ. And then it is DTL. Great. And we'll push enter. Or flight plan. Kick out the range a little bit here. Going to select our approach in the air traffic control program. Hector International is Fargo. I want to land on runway 18, and I want the vectors to final, ILS to 18, and I'm choosing force runway. So no matter what the weather is, the air traffic controllers will give me that. Let's connect the air traffic control program.
Sky Harbor information Mike, 1055 Zulu, winds are 339er at 8 knots. Visibility 10 miles. Skies clear. Temperature 15, dew point 8. Current QNH is 1017. Arriving and departing runway 32. Sky Harbor information Mike, 1055 Zulu, winds are 339er at 8 knots. Visibility 10 miles. Skies clear. Temperature 15, dew point 8. Current QNH is 1017. Arriving and departing runway 32. Sky.
Well, QNH is 1017. This Colesman window, or it's not a Colesman window. Is it a Colesman window? I forget. Whatever. This window in the autopilot is really hard to read. 1017 is right about here. But the thing is, 1017, that line right there, I know the altitude here at Sky Harbor Airport is about 600 feet. So when I'm on the ground, I don't actually need that runway setting. Altitude down here in the lower right corner is 609 feet. When I'm on the ground, all I need to do is tune that Colesman window into the current elevation. Well, actually, that would be about 610 right there. That's close to 1017. So I'm happy with that. And we can see our actual OBS, our actual number one VOR has already started to capture that signal coming off of the VOR. All we need to do is find out what radial it's on. There's the from radial. Okay, so basically northwest, and that's what we knew. We knew that our airport is southeast of Duluth, so we're on a northwest course to the first VOR. Let's get a clearance. Clearance delivery, Skyhawk November 747 Echo Charlie, ready to copy.
Skyhawk 7 Echo Charlie is cleared to Kilo Foxtrot Alpha Romeo as filed. Expect departure runway 32. Climb and maintain 5,000 feet. Expect higher clearances 2 minutes after departure. Departure on 125.45. Squawk 6023.
Skyhawk 7 Echo Charlie is cleared to Kilo Foxtrot Alpha Romeo as filed. Climb and maintain 5,000 feet. Expect higher clearances 2 minutes after departure. Departure on 125.45. Squawk 6023.
Skyhawk 7 Echo Charlie rear back correct. Contact departure on 125.45 for IFR release when number 1 for departure.
Departure on 125.45 for IFR release. Skyhawk 7 Echo Charlie.
Let's check for traffic. There's not any aircraft traffic, but this vehicular traffic is moving pretty fast. There seems to be a good amount of it. So runway 32 means 32 heading is over here on the left. So we need to taxi to the right to get to the end of 32. We will make sure our whiskey compass is lined up with our heading indicator at about 045 degrees on the whiskey compass and 045 degrees on the heading indicator. The Colesman window is set in the altimeter. The other instruments look okay, so let's roll on out. Duluth traffic, Skyhawk November 747 Echo Charlie, taxi runway 32 Duluth. Let's release the brake. Whoa, watch out, big truck. I'm on the airport. You ought to give the plane a little right of way. Oh, interesting. We've got a Navy trainer here at Duluth Airport today. Boy, the challenges you have at, whoa, the challenges you have at general aviation airports. Is this tug going to get out of my way? What's going on with this tug? I got to get around him. A little bit of police activity here today. Okay. Don't know if he's going to wait on me or if he's just going to... What are you doing there, buddy? There you go. Well, it looks like by the windsock, I'm going to be taking off with a bit of a tailwind. Why did you do that? Why are you doing that to me, air traffic control? What a gorgeous environment. Just like Minnesota in the spring, in September. Look at the flowering in the grass and the slight change of color to the trees. live weather, live time, live traffic. I know from my last flight that there's not really much of a run-up area here at the end of the runway. Most GA airports have a little area of pavement you can pull over and do a quick run-up test. But with this volume of traffic, I'm not going to worry about blocking things, so we will just put the brakes on and do a quick little run-up. This aircraft is fuel injected, no carburetor to worry about, so no carb heating. And that part of our run-up test we don't need to do. But we will check the magnetos. Remember, each cylinder has 2 spark plugs for redundancy and for maximum fuel burn. So what we want to find out is how the aircraft operates on 1 spark plug. We sure don't want the engine to die, but we also can expect a slight loss in performance when only operating on 1 spark plug. So here we go. We'll put the brakes on. We're going to kick up our throttle to 1500 RPM. And we'll go to put everything on the left magneto. There's a 100 RPM drop. We'll go back to both. Put everything on the right magneto. We have a 100 RPM drop. That's exactly what we should get. We'll go back to both. We'll turn our strobe lights on. Landing lights, taxi lights. Go into what I call full Christmas tree mode. And again, the whiskey compass is lined up with the magnetic compass. I'm sorry, the whiskey compass is lined up with the heading indicator. And our VOR is already tuned in. We don't have an ADF to tune in here. Fuel flow is fine. Fuel level is fine. Actually, fuel level is not so fine, but I have it set for unlimited fuel, so the fuel gauge won't move. That's one of the virtues of Flight Simulator. Okay, brake off. Hold the airplane with the toe brakes while I get our IFR release. Duluth departure, November 747 Echo Charlie, request IFR release, runway tree 2.
November 747 Echo Charlie, you are released for departure. Runway 32 after takeoff, turn to heading 335, then proceed direct Delta Lima Hotel, climb and maintain 5,000 feet. Release for departure void at 12:18 Zulu, advise with alternate intentions no later than 12:23 Zulu, time now is 12:11 Zulu.
November 747 Echo Charlie released for departure, runway 32 after takeoff, turn to heading 335, then direct Delta Lima Hotel, climb and maintain 5,000 feet. Release for departure void at 12:18 Zulu, Skyhawk 7 Echo Charlie.
No obstructions on the runway that I can see, no traffic on final. We'll do a quick radio in the blind. Duluth traffic, Skyhawk, November 747 Echo Charlie, taking the active departure to the west, Duluth. Okay, good broadcast in the blind, just in case there's somebody around that I can't see. We have our release, and we will take the runway. Of course, we are an uncontrolled airport, and they give us the release, but they don't have any radar on us until we're off the ground, and they don't know the other traffic that might be here, so we have to see and avoid. Power up, just gorgeous. Oh, this airport, this environment, this whole experience is wonderful. Little left rudder. 65 knots, and away we go. Wow. There's not much to that airport, is there? Now there's two ways of getting to the VOR.
Skyhawk 7 Echo Charlie, climb and maintain 6,000 feet.
Climb and maintain 6,000 feet, Skyhawk 7 Echo Charlie.
And you can either center yourself on that needle that we've already tuned in and turn to the right until you're intercepting that needle, or what you can do is move the needle to you. Look at that number right above the needle, 31 or 30.5, and then move your heading bug to that same number, 30.5, and now we will get the autopilot and we'll put it on heading.
Skyhawk 7 Echo Charlie, climb and maintain 6,000 feet.
Climb and maintain 6,000 feet, Skyhawk 7 Echo Charlie.
Put us in a 500 foot per minute climb and set our altitude for 6,000 feet. I don't think we're climbing. Now I think we're climbing too much. And we're not tracking the VOR either, are we? 3-1. We need to be over on 3-1. I need to negate that climb rate with a fair amount of forward trim. I don't know if my trim wheel is being effective. Oh, it does look like it's doing what it should be doing. Whoa. going to neutralize my trim here. Not sure what effect the trim wheel is having. Whoa! Can't forget about flying. What's that rule? Aviate. Aviate. And then take care of the other tasks. So get our heading back. You want to reach a hands-off state. We are maintaining 500 feet in the climb. We are on our heading, but we looks like we're passing our first VOR, so I'm going to flip over to our second VOR. And there it is. So we'll tune in the second VOR, and that is on a heading of 285. So we'll roll our heading indicator over to 285. And with the heading set in the autopilot, the aircraft is rolling over to 285. It still should be keeping us in a climb. I don't know why it's not. I can, if I want, to set the autopilot to Nav mode and it will track that radial. I'm still wondering why it's not climbing as it should. Oh, maybe that's it. This is not set for 6,000 feet. This is so strange. This, we should be able to set a vertical speed and a final altitude. I would settle for just a vertical speed. think I have
Skyhawk 7 Echo Charlie, contact Minneapolis Center on 134.55. Have a nice day.
Center on 134.55. Take care, Skyhawk 7 Echo Charlie.
What is Minneapolis Center? I think that's supposed to be Minneapolis
Center. Skyhawk 7 Echo Charlie, climbing to 6,000 feet.
Skyhawk 7 Echo Charlie, good morning. Radar contact. QNH is 1017.
QNH is 1017. Skyhawk 7 Echo Charlie.
This aircraft is not rated into flight into known icing. So looks like we might have cloud penetration up here. If we pop above the clouds, that's fine. If we're in the clouds, we need to request a different altitude. Remember, between 0 degrees Fahrenheit and 70 degrees Fahrenheit, the aircraft are subject in visible moisture. Aircraft are subject to icing. Oh, look outside. Some of the scenery. Just saw a highway intersection. Yeah, that highway intersection looks kind of cool. Minnesota was surveyed after the American Civil War. And land that was surveyed prior to the Civil War was surveyed using a system of measures from England, and it was called meets and bounds. One person's property would end when another person's property started, and there would be an agreement known as meets and bounds. And basically, the property lines were based on mostly terrain features, the crest of a hill or a river or other types of landmarks. And when you fly over Europe, England in particular, you'll notice that it looks like a quilt patchwork, but the quilt pieces are not in regular shapes. They're in all sorts of odd shapes, mostly based on the terrain features. That's not how America was surveyed after the Civil War. After the Civil War, America went to what was called the Township System. And the Township System are grid lines based on magnetic north. So when you're flying in Minnesota and you see these long straight highways, they are either north-south highways or east-west highways, and they are oriented toward what at the time they were built was magnetic north. Now, of course, over the years, the position of the magnetic north pole has moved, so they may not be perfectly north, but they are generally northerly and southerly oriented, or easterly or westerly oriented, based on the township system. And it makes farming more regular, when you sell plots of land.
Skyhawk 7 Echo Charlie, contact Minneapolis Center on 127.9er. Have a good one.
Center on 127.9er. Skyhawk 7 Echo Charlie.
Now he said the word Minneapolis more correctly, I think. But
Center Skyhawk 7 Echo Charlie at 6,000 feet.
Parcels of land.
Skyhawk 7 Echo Charlie, good morning. Radar contact.
Tend to be much more regular in the West, in the western United States. Makes buying and selling land easier, makes comparing relative value of land easier. Looks like we're going to be staying below this layer of scattered, so we won't need to worry about icing. Just a pleasant flight. Just a pleasant flight. There's an airport out there. If I wanted to see what airport that was, I could certainly see. Let's see. What airport is off of our right quarter? Looks like that might be the Cloquet, Carlton County. Cloquet, Carlton County Airport. So there's Sky Harbor where we departed. Duluth International. We've been under IFR radio control ever since we took off, so we don't need to ask for a specific clearance to transition the airspace as long as we're under active control. And that's true of this Class D airspace as well up at Grand Rapids. If we were VFR, Visual Flight Rules, and we were not in active communication with the controller, we would need to request permission to enter this Class D area. And I think the Class D, I don't have a VFR chart in front of me, but I believe the Class D goes up to about 6,000 or 7,000 feet, and then it's again, you don't need to. It's still controlled airspace, but you don't need to report above the Class D as long as you're under 18,000. In North America, everything above 18,000 is Class Alpha airspace and is under positive radar control. There's Hibbing, Minnesota. Hibbing is the home of Greyhound bus lines. If you've ever ridden or seen a Greyhound out on the highway, all got its start in the little town of Hibbing. Lake of the Woods, International Falls, often referred to as the ice box of North America. International Falls is sometimes referred to as the ice box. They often will have the coldest temperatures in the contiguous United States during the wintertime. The little notch up here is kind of interesting. It's near Lake of the Woods. This is the 49th parallel, which divides the United States from Canada. And in the early days of surveying, there were instances where there was a bit of a dispute about exactly where the 49th parallel was. And the United States wanted, no matter what the dispute was, they wanted to make sure that parts of Lake of the Woods were in the United States. So that little notch was created based on landmarks that didn't rely on surveying, so that those areas would be protected. Once you get out into the prairie land out here, of course the land is maybe not quite so valuable, and the accuracy of the 49th parallel isn't quite so necessary. Well, it looks like we're coming up to our second VOR. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that third VOR number from our number 2 nav, our number 2 GPS. Remember, it's 110.2. I'm going to set that 110.2 in the number 2 spot on our number 1 GPS. Oops. That's not what I want to do. I want to do it over here. $110.2. Okay, so now when we've reached GPZ, Grand Rapids, Minnesota, we can flip over to the Detroit Lakes VOR without much issue. So my number 1 VOR is working for me. My ADF receiver and my number 2 VOR are not working for me. If we were in an area with a little more nav aids, I might put those to work. One thing about rural Minnesota is there aren't a lot of radio nav aids to work with. I could tune in Hibbing at 110.8. I could tune in Lake Bemidji at 110. Or Brainerd at, oh no, Brainerd's an airport, not a VOR. Okay. 110.8 or 110. Let's just tune in Hibbing at 110.8 just because we can. Let's tune it in on the number 2 VOR. Okay, there's 110.8. Let's flip it. And here it is on the number 2. If we were to fly to Hibbing, we would make this radial, which is the 14-degree radial outbound from Hibbing, or it is the 193 or 195 radial inbound. And of course, we could draw a line on the chart to this radial, and it would give our position. So we were on the radial to Grand Rapids, but we would be crossing a particular radial from the VOR to Hibbing. And that's basic VOR navigation. If you have if you can track 2 VORs, then you can find your place on any chart. And you don't need to be tracking on either one. It's easier if you're tracking on one and then using the cross-reference from another. That's 97% of the time, that's exactly how you're going to use it. But if you were, let's say you were using GPS navigation and you were flying between 2 points on GPS, you could still use 2 VORs that neither one of them you were tracking on, but if you find an intersection of where you are on those 2 VORs, then you can plot yourself on a chart. Does that make sense? "24 miles to Grand Rapids," and was I correct? Is there an airport at Grand Rapids with us co-located with that VOR? I don't remember. I think we'll be able to see an airport ahead of us 24 miles out. After we have departed Detroit Lakes, I fully expect to get vectors to final for the ILS, so we will tune in the We'll leave the Detroit Lakes frequency in the number 2, but we will tune in the ILS to runway 18 in the number 1. So as soon as we have VOR, I'm sorry, localizer, LOC, then we can start tracking on the localizer and then eventually pick up the glide slope for an ILS approach. We can take a look at that approach. It's got it set up for the RNAV. I don't want to do the RNAV, I want to do an ILS. And let's show that chart as an overlay. So here's Detroit Lakes. We're going to get vectored onto final. Frequency is 108.9. It has a co-located NDB at Keeney, which is 365. And I'm going to go ahead and tune that into my ADF receiver, my automatic direction finder. The final approach fix is identified by this symbol. It's called the Maltese cross. And the Maltese cross, or final approach fix, tells you when you should intercept this glide slope. Usually it's a 3-degree glide slope. It could vary. Let's see here. Sector altitude. 4,200 feet is the highest obstacle in our sector altitude. Missed approach is the Fargo VOR, and there's the hold direction indicator. Decision height is 200 feet, which is standard. I don't see anything for the degree of descent. Oh, here we go. Glide slope 3 degrees. Okay, glide slope 3 degrees. So it's a standard 3-degree glide slope and a standard 200 feet decision altitude. And Keeney is our final approach fix, where we should intercept glide slope, and we can tune in the Keeney ADF. So what this means is when we're watching the glide slope come into range on our OBS, at the same time we reach the interception point to descend on the glide slope, at that same time you should also watch the ADF needle flip from our inbound tracking to our outbound tracking to Keeney at 365 on the ADF. So let's tune in 365, and that is a good brief to our approach. We'll flip it around. I don't know exactly how far out we can catch that. Now, it's an AM radio signal, and if you wanted to listen to it, matter of fact, I'm going to put ADF on. I'm going to put marker on. And these are speakers. So when right now, the ADF needle is horizontal, which means we're not picking it up. But it's an AM radio transmission, so it could have skip off the atmosphere if you've ever heard of atmospheric skip. Sometimes you can catch these signals from very far distances, just like you would an AM station picking it up over hundreds of miles based on atmospheric skip. So when we track it, the needle will come alive, and we'll also start to hear its Morse code identifier. If you ever listen to an AM station and every so often the broadcaster gives you his call letters, well, that's not just being courteous. It's actually a law, a requirement, and it goes back to the early days of aviation when planes would use AM radio stations as their navigation. And by listening to those call letters, then they would know what station they were listening to, and they could plot it on a chart. So that's a holdover from that. Today we've got the Morse identifier. Of course, most people don't know Morse code, so what you do is, if you're a Navy flyer, you probably do know Morse code, but what you would do here is you would look at this little dot dash, dot dash, dot dash. So it'd be dit 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 dit, and you would hear that repeating, and that would identify keying. And actually, if you want to know what those dashes stand for, it stands for AA. Dit dit, that's A, and dit dit, that's A, and all these are spelled out. IIAM. Dit 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 dit. So this is the code you would hear on the ILS, and we'll have that on our radio as well. Dit it, dit dit, dit dit, dit dit, and then that will repeat. And so you would listen to that and then line it up with the Morse identifier, and then you could identify what you're listening to. And actually, if you really wanted to get technical about it, we ought to be doing that for every nav aid that we use. So right now we are tracking toward Grand Rapids, and its identifier is this one. Well, let's see if we get it here. No voice on frequency. Less than 25 watts. It's if you lose okay, if you're not under I don't know. Here's the identifier. GPZ. So this is G. Dit 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 dit. And this is P. Dit 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 dit. And this is Z. Dit 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 dit. So and that would repeat itself, and you could listen to that now. And let's just for fun, let's see if we can hear that and see if it actually lines up. It's really faint. Okay, I had to wait 3 cycles before I heard it, but then I did hear it. Dash, dash, dot, dot, dash, dash, dot, dash, 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 dot, dot. Yeah, so I did hear it, and it was correct. But it's very faint. And in general aviation flying, as a general rule, you should, when you change onto a frequency, you should do it. Now, of course, we have the backup of GPS, and we can see that we're actually heading to the correct VOR. But without that, you don't know. We're 4 miles from the VOR. At 2 miles, we're going to reach what's called the cone of ambiguity. What's the word there that's correct? The cone where the signal is ambiguous. Is that correct? And we are now tracking, our autopilot is on nav. It's tracking the signal. And this needle becomes very sensitive as you get closer, and within 2 miles it will get totally inaccurate. So what you should do is move your heading bug onto the heading you're on, change your autopilot to heading mode, out of nav mode. So this way, when the needle starts to flip, the aircraft won't become wandering in the sky looking for a place to go. Because we're staying on our heading now, and we can watch the needle 2 miles. We're going to be in the cone of ambiguity. Boy, I wish I could say that word. And we're going to start to see the needle flip on the number 1. Remember, the number 2 is still pointing at Hibbing, wherever Hibbing is. It's falling behind us. There it is. It's all due east. It's coming out to be due east of us. .3. And here you can see station passage. The needle will flip. We're now 100 miles from our next VOR. And there is station passage. Right now, you can see, oh, okay. So I'm going to flip over to the Detroit Lakes frequency. And we don't have Detroit Lakes on the radio, so I'm going to, because we have GPS, I'm going to use the heading
Skywalk
bug
7 Echo Charlie, contact Minneapolis Center on 118.05. Have a good morning.
to turn us in.
Center on 118.05 Skyhawk 7 Echo Charlie.
It always seems you have a controller
Center
change.
Skyhawk 7 Echo Charlie at 6,000 feet.
Skyhawk 7 Echo Charlie, good morning. Radar contact.
It always seems you have a controller change right when you're changing your nav frequency. So we're tuned to 110.2. I'm going to verify that, because if that's wrong, that could be the reason why we're not receiving it. It is 100 miles away. Oh, it's a 111.2. See, good thing I checked. Good thing I checked. So we'll flip it back. And then we will change that little 111.2. Okay, now we'll flip it back. And we're still not receiving it. That's okay. It's 100 miles, it's 96 miles away. When we do get it, we can start to track it. But in the meantime, we use our heading indicator and our GPS. And what we could do is take our course that we just were using, the 111.4 from Grand Rapids, and put that in our number 2 radio. And what that will do is we'll backtrack the radio on the number 2. So we'll tune in 111.4 on the number 2. Okay, and then what we want to do here is move the OBS into the from, with the from caret. This is called a caret. This little symbol right there is called a caret. We want that caret in the from direction. Because we're flying outbound from Grand Rapids. And the heading should be 255. Roughly 255. So we can move this to 255. We don't have anything to. There's no signal to track on right now on the number 1. But when we do get it coming in, it'll probably be on the 255 inbound 255 to Detroit Lakes. So when we catch Detroit Lakes, we'll hear the Morse identifier, and we will, this needle will come alive, and we'll get our little 2 caret. Let's find out what that Morse identifier is. And it is, there we are. We're going to be listening for this guy, which is dash dot dot dash dot dash dot dot dash dot dot dash dot dash dot dot, repeating, and that will tell us that it is Detroit Lakes we're listening to. This Park Rapids is a DME. We're not using it today. But if you wanted to find out your distance to Park Rapids, you could do that with that frequency, 110.6. Land of 10,000 lakes. You know, I think someone once counted them, and there were 11 or 14,000 or 11,000. Actually, it was quite a bit more than 10,000. But they rounded it down to 10,000 for marketing purposes. But I don't know the whole geologic history here, but I am assuming that when the last glacier receded, it left these potholes that are now the lakes. And these lakes aren't necessarily monstrously deep. The Great Lakes are, all except Lake Huron. I think Lake Huron is rather shallow, but the other lakes are monstrously deep. And because of the St. Lawrence Seaway, the Great Lakes also have ocean-going ships that have sunk and now sit at the lake bed. We do not have Fargo Airport in our flight plan. I could actually, you know what I could do? We could go to the flight plan and don't know how I would do it. I was going to say we could enter Fargo into our flight plan, but no real need to. We're going to get vectors. We don't want to fly directly to Fargo anyway because we're not landing east-west at Fargo, our general route of flight. We're landing to the south. So we're going to want those vectors. I had mentioned that the ADF, the automatic direction finder, there in the lower right corner, is based on ADM radio signals. Just as a matter of trivia, this is exactly how the Japanese attack pilots coming off of the carriers, the 4 Japanese carriers, on December 6th, 1942, out in the Pacific, that's how they were able to find the United States fleet anchored at Pearl Harbor. They simply tuned in to the AM radio stations being broadcast from Honolulu Their ADF needle pointed them straight to Honolulu, and from Honolulu was an easy jump over to Pearl Harbor to attack the ships. Similarly, many times if you are tracking on an ADF, which remember before VOR that was the way of navigation, you could listen to your favorite country station or listen to the ball game or listen to the news while you're following the needle. Very common. Now you wonder, why did we give up on ADF? Actually, we really haven't. The ADF transmitters that are out there, they're very inexpensive to maintain, so they still operate. And of course, every AM radio station is an ADF transmitter, and then there are other ADF transmitters. Most of them that operate are in connection with the landing procedure, like the one we're going to use today in our landing at Fargo. So when you find them, they're usually around the vicinity of airports used in the landing procedure. ADFs out in the boonies aren't as common. But the reason we gave it up, here's how an ADF works. Imagine your friend is holding a flashlight. He's holding it straight up in the air, and you can see the beam going up into the air. And you're flying your aircraft along, and you're heading right for the beam. Now, if you were an observer in a balloon looking straight down, would you, as an observer in the balloon, could you see the aircraft heading in a straight line for that flashlight beam? And the answer is sometimes yes, sometimes no. If you're in a no-wind situation, yes, you would track directly to the beam and you'd be flying a perfect ADF navigation. Well, the problem is very rarely do pilots have a no-wind situation. The wind is going to blow your aircraft, the whole air mass that your airplane is located in, the whole air mass moves and you move along with it. That's kind of how you don't when you think of wind, don't think of a force pushing on the side of your airplane. Think of your airplane as being part of this mass of air that moves in relation to the ground. So you're being moved to the left or being moved to the right, and you, from your perspective in the cockpit, you look like you're flying straight to that beam of light. But from the observer above you, you're flying a parabolic arc. You're flying this arc based on which way the air mass is moving, which way you're being pushed in the air mass, to the left or to the right of your straight line course. And for that reason, ADF navigation was substituted with VOR navigation. Now, what's a VOR? Well, VOR is an FM frequency modulation, and is actually two frequencies. Now you've got a friend. This is a very talented friend, and he wants to show you how a VOR works. So in one hand he's holding the flashlight straight up, and the beam goes straight up into infinity, and you can track on it. And your aircraft hears that signal from that FM frequency, and it knows right where that station is. And just like the ADF, it can track right to it. But now your friend has got this magical arm that rotates around on a horizontal plane with a second flashlight. Now he's got one flashlight pointing straight up. He's got the second flashlight, it's pointed north, and then he starts it on a clockwise cycle. There's 0 degrees, 10, 20, 30, 90, 180, 270, and back to 0. He's circling in a cycle with the second flashlight on a horizontal plane. So your airplane now sees two signals. It sees the beam that going straight up in the sky. It sees that all the time. But the second the rotating signal, your airplane only can see when the beam is pointed at your airplane. That one particular radial, that one particular slice of this 360 slices of pie. Imagine a big pie cut into 360 pieces. And when the flashlight, the horizontal flashlight, is pointed right at you, then you can see it. But you can't see that horizontal flashlight at any other time. So what your airplane does, in the magic of its VOR receiver, it sees the vertical light, it knows when the horizontal light is pointing to true north, and it calculates the amount of time from when it should be pointed to true north to when it can see the horizontal light. That time tells the instrument where along that piece of pie where you are. So let's say you're at 30 degrees offset from north. The instrument knows how much time from north to 030 it takes. So it will compare that amount of time, and the instrument knows what radial you're on. So that's basically how VOR navigation works. There's two signals, one that your instrument is getting all the time, and one that the instrument is only getting intermittently when that cycling beam of light comes to you, hits you in your direction. So it's like the old submarine days when you saw the radar on the submarine. It makes a circular pattern, ping, 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 and when it comes around to you, your airplane notes the time of that, calculates from a reference, which is due north, and it knows where along that radial you are. So this time, you're not flying toward the beam and getting blown around by the wind. Now you're flying on a particular slice of pie, a particular radial. Your plane knows where it is on that radial, and every time it gets that cycle, it knows where it should be. It knows what type of correction the plane needs to make to stay on that radial. Anyway, that in a nutshell is VOR navigation. Very high omnidirectional radio is what VOR stands for. We're tootling along, 59 miles from Detroit Lakes. We have not yet picked up that VOR, and we have not yet picked up the ADF needle from Fargo. And the day is getting prettier and prettier here in northern Minnesota. Early September day. I'm using the heading bug to turn us a little bit to the right because I want to be more square on that outbound radio from the last
Skyhawk 7 Echo Charlie, contact Minneapolis Center on 134.75. Enjoy.
Center on 134.75 Skyhawk 7 Echo Charlie. Center Skyhawk 7 Echo Charlie at 6,000 feet.
Skyhawk 7 Echo Charlie, good morning. Radar contact. QNH is 1020.
QNH is 1020 Skyhawk 7 Echo Charlie.
1020 is the QNH we were just given. So we will adjust that, and the autopilot will adjust our altitude so that we're back at 6,000 feet. Because we're under 18,000 feet, we are flying what's called a pressure altitude. Imagine a balloon. Your balloon is one size, and as the temperature in the room increases, the balloon will either contract or expand. And I don't know for sure, but I'll say I think it's going to expand. So that whole atmosphere is expanding. And so if you're flying a pressure altitude at a hotter day, then you would actually be further away from the ground than on a colder day, because the whole atmosphere has gotten bigger and your relationship in that atmosphere is further away from the ground. So a high pressure day is a day when the numbers in the window, the Colesman window, are a little higher, either in inches of mercury here on the right or in millibars on the left. And that expanded altitude is called a pressure altitude, and under 18,000 feet, all pilots fly a pressure altitude. Now, the pressure altitude changes based on conditions, based on temperature. So during your course of your flight, you'll get corrections in that pressure altitude, and you can make that adjustment in the Colesman window and the adjustment to your altitude. Above 18,000 feet, all pilots fly what's called standard pressure, 2992 in inches of mercury, and 1013 in millibars. And that way, you don't have to monitor the local pressure. All pilots above that altitude just stay on standard pressure, and everyone knows they may not always be at the exact altitude from the ground, but they're always in the exact altitude in relation to other aircraft. Of course, a good pilot always maintains a scan. Keep your eyes outside the aircraft, and the way to do a good scan is to pick a segment of sky and keep your head still and your eyes looking straight ahead. And humans evolved, many people say, as a predatory creature. And as a predator, what we trigger on is movement. Big cats and big predators, they will stand very still, and what they're looking for is movement. And that's what triggers our brain into seeing something. So An effective scan consists on taking a segment of sky and looking for relative movement. And then once you've scanned that part of the sky, move on to the next segment. And then move on to the next segment. But stop your head, focus straight ahead, and using your peripheral vision, your left and right vision to the side, what you're looking for is relative movement. Now this takes care of about 85% of potential traffic conflicts. Well, what about that 15%? Well, 13% of the remaining 15% is going to be traffic that you can't do anything about. It's traffic coming up from behind. And you basically don't have a whole lot of ability to scan back there. You've got to trust that other aviators are watching out for you. So 13% you can't do anything about. And then there's that 2%. Now, what about that 2%? That 2% of traffic is traffic that is directly ahead of you, heading directly away, or heading directly toward you. That traffic will have virtually no left to right movement, and your peripheral vision won't pick it up. And that is the scariest traffic to have. If you remember, there was a crash of I believe it was a 727 and a Cessna in the San Diego area. And the Cessna was in the 727's field of view, but he had almost no relative movement. And without that relative movement, the pilot flying the 727 was going so fast that he couldn't correct for the Cessna, and they ended up colliding. Deadly accident. But you take care and do an effective scan. 13% of the scan you can't do anything about because it's behind you, and 2% of the scan will be almost ineffective because it will have no relative movement. It will be traffic that is flying directly away from you, or traffic that is flying head-on directly toward you. And of course, the head-on toward you traffic will grow larger in your windscreen, but it will grow larger so imperceptibly that you may not know it until it's too late. Not to scare you or anything, but an effective scan relieves you of a lot of air-to-air conflict. We're 39 miles from Grand Rapids, and I'm wondering why, from Detroit Lakes, and I'm wondering why we haven't picked up that frequency yet. Let's just check the frequency one time again. 111.2, and we are on 111.2. Automatic transcribed weather broadcast. So if you listen, we have it set to listen to when we get it. We might get some weather off of it. Don't know why we're not getting it. Oh, there we go. We just got it. You can hear the Morse identifier. Let's see if we can track that, get that Morse identifier. I got it. dash, dot, dot. Okay, I lost it. Dash, dot, dash, dot, dash, dot, dot. Okay, that is the correct VOR. We can now tune our OBS omnibearing selection. And now we can go off of heading mode on the autopilot and we go to Nav mode. And Nav mode will put us on the radio. And as you notice, we also started to pick up the ADF frequency coming off of Fargo. So we're flying directly toward the Fargo airport. Now once we start getting vectors from air traffic control, this ADF needle will continue to tell us where the airport is, but it won't be necessarily pointing straight ahead. And you can tell by the barber pole that we have lost the VOR from Duluth. We had that Duluth one tuned into there. So what I'm going to do is in the standby slot for the number 1 radio, I'm going to put in our ILS frequency. So the ILS frequency is 1089. When 1089 is in the standby, we are tracking on 111.2. So once we have passed Detroit Lakes and we're starting to get vectors, I will actually, as soon as we pass Detroit Lakes, I'm going to turn to a heading which will help air traffic control get us on vectors, and I will flip over to 1089, which is the ILS frequency. And that what we're looking for first is localizer lock, our left and right guidance, and then glide slope. But both of those, localizer and glide slope, will come over the ILS frequency. The VOR frequency is only left and right guidance. There's no vertical guidance in a VOR or VORTAC. I mentioned VORTAC. A VOR is FM transmission. VORTAC is also an FM TACAN. TACAN is also FM transmission. TACAN is used by the military. Civilian airplanes don't have, I would say most all the time, don't have TACAN receivers in them. But a VORTAC is a combination VOR transmitter and a TACAN transmitter for military aircraft. So how does that affect you as a general aviation pilot? It doesn't affect you not even one little bit. Since you don't have a TACAN receiver, what it's transmitting makes no difference. If we were at a higher altitude, we might start calculating what descent rate we needed to established to get down to a level where we could intercept the glide slope just north of Fargo. At 6,000 feet, I'm not going to worry about it terribly much. We might be given a descent by the controllers. We might not. If we're cleared for the approach, that means that we can determine our own descent rate. Probably be good to get down to about 4,000 feet. Let's look at that procedure one more time. 2,500 feet is the altitude to intercept the Maltese Cross. Probably be descended down to 2,500 feet. As a general rule, general aviation pilots like to get down to the lowest altitude they are cleared to as soon as they can. Of course, in these days of noise abatement, that's something that the controllers know, and they may not bring you down to an altitude that you want to come down to right away. Also remember that sector altitude. If you are northwest, if you are between the 360 radial and the 27 radial in the northwest quadrant, you have an obstacle that is up to 4,200 feet. 4,200 feet is the safest, is the lowest you can safely go. If you are in the southwest quadrant, 3,200 is the safest you can go down to. And if you are in the south, or if you are anywhere east of the 180-360 line, the lowest safe altitude is 2,900 feet. There could be obstructions up to those altitudes in those sectors. Those are called sector altitudes. But if you've been cleared to 2,500, you're safe at 2,500. Missed approach, climb to 2,500. Climb to 2,500. Direct to the Fargo VOR. I'm trying to find out where the Fargo VOR is. I don't think the Fargo VOR is on the field. Let's... Oh, here it is. You can see behind the... Here's the airfield. The Fargo VOR is here. It's very light to see. But if missed approach, you would continue on direct to the Fargo VOR, and then you would establish a hold in this direction, in a clockwise direction. So what you would do is you would do what's called a teardrop entry. You would fly to the VOR, you would angle out to your left and enter in a teardrop entry to a hold at 2,500 feet. Climb to 2,500 feet and hold until you are directed otherwise. So that's the missed approach. Fargo VOR, 2,500 hold, teardrop entry.
Skiok 7 Echo Charlie contact Minneapolis Center on 126.1 Ava good morning.
Center on 126.1 Skyhawk 7 Echo Charlie. Center Skyhawk 7 Echo Charlie at 6,000 feet.
Skyhawk 7 Echo Charlie good morning. Radar contact. QNH is 1019er.
QNH is 1019er Skyhawk 7 Echo Charlie.
Pressure has changed ever so slightly from 1020 to 1019. Gonna get this correct. Once we get to the Detroit Lakes VOR, I'm going to turn off the audio from that VOR. I don't want to listen to it because I want to listen to the ADF, which actually, you know, we are tuned into the, let's do that right now. Let's turn off the Nav1 audio. Let's go to our chart and we'll find out what the ADF should be putting out. And remember, oh, it's AA, dot dash, dot dash. So let's listen very carefully. Do you hear that? Dot dash, dot dash. That's exactly what we're getting. Dot dash, dot dash. I know a good number of pilots will listen. They may identify the VOR initially by Morse, but once they've identified it, they turn off the speaker. They don't want to listen to it. I believe, go ahead and have it on. You know, it doesn't hurt to have it on. And if you were to be droning along and you were to lose that radio frequency for any reason, maybe the station lost power suddenly and you lost it, your needle might be stuck. You might not know it by looking at the needle, but you would certainly know it right away by the loss of that identifier. So keep the identifier on while you're using it. In my way of thinking, that Morse identifier is kind of comforting. It's a little friend that you carry along with you on your journey. Nine miles to VOR passage. Again, we're going to put the heading bug on our current heading. We'll move the autopilot into the heading mode. So that we can have station passage, but it won't affect our control of the aircraft. As we approach the zone of ambiguity. Zone of confusion. Zone of... It's like if you're relying on your whiskey compass and you're up in the North Pole, you know, the whiskey compass is almost totally useless the further north you go. It's that you could consider that the earthly zone of ambiguity for the whiskey compass. I grew up in Washington State, and in Washington there was always what was called magnetic variation. And if you look at what's called the compass card here, this compass card will have corrections for magnetic, for the instruments on board. You know, electronic instruments put out interference to the compass. So let's say you wanted to steer north. which you would think would be 360. Well, to steer 360, you actually have to steer 359 because the electronic emissions from the equipment kind of mess up the compass a little bit. So those are small corrections that are individual to each aircraft. And in that same way, you can think of magnetic variation on an earthly scale. So when I was living in Washington State, we always had to correct for magnetic variation. And one thing about Minnesota, if I'm remembering correctly, it was like 13 degrees. 13 degree correction for magnetic variation. Here in Minnesota, true north, the location of the actual real live North Pole, and magnetic north, the place in the earth where the magnetic lines all flux together, are in different locations, but they are along the same line. Oh, we got some interesting city off on our left-hand side. I'm going to take an external view. And we got some little city going on here. So magnetic north and true north are along the same line, so there was virtually no magnetic variation when you live in Minnesota. And if you fly out of the same area all the time, you get to know what your local magnetic variation is. Station passage in 2 miles. You can see that our needle is swung wildly out. We haven't changed our heading at all, but you can see the needle is no longer tracking. We're in that zone of ambiguity. The needle is sensitive, and then it gets really sensitive. And then once we've crossed, I'm going to choose an outbound radial to fly on. So I'll be using the same VOR. Okay, there's station passage. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tune the OBS on the outbound. Oops. Oh, yeah, we're not quite out of the zone of ambiguity yet. Well, let's turn to 300. Remember, we don't want to go directly to Fargo Airport. We want to go just north of Fargo Airport, so we can pick up the vectors to final. And then once we're on 300, let's select 300 as the outbound radial. There it is.
Skyhawk 7 Echo Charlie, contact Fargo approach on 120.4. Have a nice day.
Approach on 120.4 Skyhawk 7 Echo Charlie.
290. Now, we don't want to go to nav.
Approach Skyhawk 7 Echo Charlie at 6,000 feet.
We don't want to go to nav on the
Skyhawk 7
autopilot.
Echo Charlie, good morning. Radar contact.
Because if we went to nav on the autopilot would attempt to track us inbound on that radio. And we're not flying inbound, we're flying outbound. So use your heading bug and fly a heading. You can still use the instrument for navigation, but because you're flying outbound, use the heading bug to control the autopilot. You can see if we were flying directly to Fargo, that ADF needle would be pointing straight ahead. But we're flying to the north of Fargo, off to one side, and as we progress, this heading, the ADF needle, will continue to process to the right and recess to the left. It will recess off our left wing, and then eventually it'll be spun all the way around to our tail until we are vectored to get us lined up with the runway. And then when we're on final lined up with the runway, again, it should be pointing straight ahead. This distance, 6.7, 6.8, remember that's tracking from Detroit Lakes. That was our last VOR. There's nothing left in the flight plan. Let's turn off the Nav1 Morse identifier. So what we're listening to now is the ADF identifier, the AA .. And when we get to it, some airports have no marker beacons. Some have an outer marker beacon only. Some have an outer and an inner marker beacon, and hopefully this one will have an outer, middle, and inner marker beacon. Usually you would reach the, is it the middle marker at the, okay, I mentioned the Maltese Cross. This is the Maltese Cross. It's called the final approach fix. And this is the point where we intercept that 3-degree glide slope. This is also co-located with the Kenai ADF, the one we're listening to right now. You can see it by this little dotted pattern right around here. That is a marker. I don't know if it's the middle marker or the outer marker. But you're going to hear that marker tone, and at the same time you hear the tone, you're going to see the needle flip around 180 degrees, and we're going to be on our glide slope intercept. Those three things will happen all at the same time at that Maltese Cross, or what's called the final approach fix. I don't exactly know where the term Maltese Cross came from, but if you look at the symbol, I get over there and look at the symbol, it looks very much like what the German army uses, or the German government uses for their national symbol, and what the Nazis used during World War II. So I don't know the history of the Maltese Cross, but it might be Germanic. terrain here looks a little rougher than it was in the Duluth area. Not quite as flat, not quite as all farmland. That's some scrubby trees. There is no old growth forest in Minnesota or Wisconsin. Before coal was discovered as an energy source, the United States depended on wood burning, to stay warm in those cold, cold winters. And 100% of the old growth forests in the upper Midwests have been cleared for human purposes. So every tree is not old growth. The famous image of Paul Bunyan and the Blue Ox. They were, of course, they were lumbermen, and in those early days before coal was an energy source, you really depended on that wood. Let's talk to control and see if we can get ourselves down to 4,000 feet. Fargo approach, Cessna, try that again. Fargo approach, Skyhawk November 747 Echo Charlie, request flight level 040. You could say 4,000 feet, but for the purposes of the air traffic control program, I've noticed that it understands me better if I just use flight levels. I've never tried using military terminology, would be angels. Never used military terminology. Don't know if the air traffic control program would understand it. I do see that the air traffic control program is chewing on my request. It's thinking about my request. I imagine we're getting fairly close to the point where the controller would descend me anyway. And I see the terrain is changing. We're getting into a
Skyhawk 7 Echo Charlie, turn right heading 302 vectors to the ILS approach for runway 18 at Hector International.
Heading 302 vectors to the ILS approach for runway 18 Skyhawk 7 Echo Charlie.
We're getting our vectors. And you can see that I was mentioning, you can see the township system, see the east-west roads and the north-south roads in perfect squares. You would not see this in England. You would not see this in Europe. You would not see this in the eastern United States. This is not the meets and bounds system. This is the township's grid system. And look at the land that had been a little rough with tree splotches is turning much more rural into traditional American farmland. This is wonderful to see. And of course, the genius of the latest incarnation of Microsoft is that this is taken from Google Maps. So when the topography changes like this, you can bet that that's a representation of the real topography. One great thing about having the ADF needle pointed at the airport is no matter what contortions of vectoring we might get from air traffic control, turn left here, turn right here, la 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 la, we always have a reference to the Fargo airport just by simply using the ADF needle. It might not get you there in a perfectly straight line, but just like the Japanese fleet at Pearl Harbor, it'll get you there.
Skyhawk 7 Echo Charlie turn right heading 307.
Heading 307 Skyhawk 7 Echo Charlie.
I'm going to flip over to our ILS frequency. I believe that is the 1089 right there. Oh, there we go, 1089 right there. A to from needle doesn't mean anything when you're on an ILS.
Skyhawk 7 Echo Charlie turn left heading 302.
Heading 302 Skyhawk 7 Echo Charlie.
If you ever hear an ILS back course, what that's doing, it's flying the localizer of an ILS, but the glide slope is not set up for the runway you're landing at. The glide slope is set up for the runway in the other direction, so the glide slope information is inaccurate. And from a pilot's perspective, this is very counterintuitive. You have to be monstrously careful when you're flying an ILS back course because your eyes have to pay attention to the localizer needle, but they have to totally ignore the glide slope needle. And it is monstrously difficult to ignore a needle moving in front of your eyes. Don't try to fly an ILS back course unless you really know what you're doing. They just totally ignored my request to descend. That's okay. I'm not really sure about how this autopilot works. If I put in the 4,000, will it start to descend? I don't think it will start to descend me right away until I give it a rate of descent. I think that's how it works. I'm just going to put in the 4,000 and see if it will just leave me at 6 until I'm ready to give it a descent rate. Hear that constant dot dash interval dot dash. That's our little AA in Morse code coming off of our ADF. You can see the ADF is spinning We're going to have the airport due west of us here in just a bit. And now the farmland has really dramatically changed into the atypical American township grid system. This is the upper Midwest plains. Now, much of Minnesota, what makes Minnesota different than North Dakota? North Dakota goes on for miles and miles and miles of this. The breadbasket of America, the breadbasket of the world. And in the wintertime, North Dakota can be just absolutely brutally cold. Not so much because of the raw temperature, just because there's not any terrain to break up the surface winds. And those surface winds get cold and they get biting and they get strong. Well, Minnesota does have its share of farm country like this. Matter of fact, we are over Minnesota now. We're not going to be in North Dakota until after we started to make our turn. Fargo is right on the border. But as you saw when we left Duluth, much of Minnesota has got a hillier topography. And those hills don't necessarily warm things up, but they do break the wind. And sometimes just not having that wind makes all the world a difference in winter conditions. I'm starting to believe that we're not going to get a descent from control. They're going to have us intercept the glide slope from 6,000 feet, which I'm happy with. I don't mind that. I'm going to reduce our throttle to put us in the 100 knot range. It's still beyond our flap operating range. We're going to be getting vectored here any second, I imagine.
Skyhawk 7 Echo Charlie turn left heading 271 descent and maintain 3,500 feet. QNH is 1020 at Hector International.
Heading 271 descent and maintain 3,500 feet. Skyhawk 7 Echo Charlie.
Skyhawk 7 Echo Charlie cleared for ILS to runway 18 fly heading 208 to intercept final descent and maintain 2,500 feet.
Cleared for ILS approach to runway 18 fly heading 208 descent and maintain 2,500 feet. Skyhawk 7 Echo Charlie.
208 on the heading. We got a new Colesman setting of 1020, I believe. Okay, that's our altimeter setting. We're down to 2,500 we were cleared to. And we just captured our glide slope. I'm going to go to approach mode on the, I'm sorry, we captured our localizer. Capture our localizer, so I'm going to go into approach mode. And we're going to hold our altitude. And here we're about to capture glide slope. There's the runway. Runway's in sight.
Skyhawk 7 Echo Charlie QNH is 1020 at Hector International. Contact Tower on 133.8. Have a good morning.
QNH is 1020 Tower on 133.8 Skyhawk 7 Echo Charlie.
Now you can watch when we...
Tower Skyhawk 7 Echo Charlie inbound for ILS approach runway 18.
Skyhawk 7 Echo Charlie, good morning. Radar contact. Continue ILS to runway 18 call when established on final.
Continue ILS to runway 18 will call when established on final. Skyhawk 7 Echo Charlie.
I'm going to reduce our speed back to that 100 knot area. Remember, when we're at 2,500 feet, we're on glide slope. When we're at 2,500 feet, we're going to get the Maltese cross. We're going to get the ADF needle swinging around. We'll be on our final approach fix. There's flap operating range at 85, 90 knots. I'm going to hold off on putting in flaps right away. Keep our speed up a little bit. Controllers like it. When you're just starting to fly, you always want to fly a little slower because it gives you more time to think, more time to adjust, more time to prepare. But as a general rule, controllers like it when you keep your speed up until you need to slow down, because they may have other aircraft behind you, and they may have much faster aircraft behind you. This is Class Charlie airspace. This is the biggest city in North Dakota. Commercial airliners operate out of here. We're right on glide slope and localizer. You can see our number 1 VOR is perfect. We are a little bit beyond flap operating speed. We're approaching 3,000 feet. Right in the 2,500 range is what I'm gonna wait until station passage. We also should get a marker beacon at 2,500 feet. I'm gonna turn off the ADF identifier. No more AA coming at us. But we will be listening for that marker beacon. And it'll get us into flap operating range after we've crossed the final approach fix. "200 feet to go." Listen for it and watch for it. Watch the needle, watch the ADF needle, and listen for the marker. There's the marker, outer marker. See station passage. Oh, see the ADF needle swung around? It swung around monstrously faster than it might in real life. But it swung around real fast. Okay. So we're in flaps range. Let's give us the first range of flaps. I have to look down to see. Yes, okay, see the flap indicator there in the lower right? We have 1 notch of flaps. I'm going to give us a little more power to keep us... I want us in the upper part of the white arc, which is our flap operating range. Let's go to flaps 2. Check our flap indicator there. Still right on glide slope. We're in the upper part of the flap operating range. Remember, you can't damage the flaps as long as you're in the flap, the white arc. You can even be at full flaps. You can go from 0 to full flaps right away, and you might make some discomfort for your passengers, but you're not going to hurt the flaps if you're in flap operating range. Okay, we have full flaps. We're down to landing speed. I'm going to disconnect the autopilot.
Skywalk 7 Echo Charlie ins Arecam cleared to land runway 18.
Clear to land runway 18 Skyhawk 7 Echo Charlie.
We have our landing clearance. We're just a little fast, and we're a little high. We're on speed. We're a little high. There's, by the Vossi, the Pappy, we are on glide slope, and by the Needles, we're pretty much on glide slope. There's the middle marker. Speed's a little low, we're a little high. Speed's on target, we're on glide slope. Don't flare too early. Keep that picture. Keep that picture. Hold the nose up. Of course, this truck is going to cross the runway right in front of me. Of course, that always happens. Keep your picture. Keep your picture.
Skywalk 7 Echo Charlie exit runway when evil.
Clear of active Skyhawk 7 Echo Charlie.
Skywalk 7 Echo Charlie stay with ME until fully clear of active.
Wilco. Skyhawk 7 Echo Charlie.
Skywalk 7 Echo Charlie welcome to Hector International contact ground on 121.9. Enjoy your stay.
Ground on 121.9 Skyhawk 7 Echo Charlie.
Get out of the way, van. This is an airport, not a parking lot. Looks like the North Dakota National Guard over here with the helicopters. Fargo ground, Skyhawk.
Aircraft calling ground, say again with your call sign.
Fargo ground, Skyhawk November 747 Echo Charlie would like to taxi to parking.
Skyhawk 7 Echo Charlie taxi to general aviation parking via taxiways Bravo, Delta, runway 13 Golf 4, hold short runway 18, and runway 31.
Taxi to general aviation parking via taxiways Bravo, Delta, runway 13 Golf 4, hold short runway 18, and runway 31 Skyhawk 7 Echo Charlie.
I don't want to spend my time taxiing around this airport. It is Payware Airport. It is beautiful. But I just want to see a Cessna sign up here. And I'm in a Cessna. It's like, park next to the Caravan. This is good enough for me. Well, folks, today was just a flat-out enjoyable day for me. I hope you have, I'm a bit of a control freak. I like to be in control. I understand when you're watching a video, you don't have a sense of that. Well, look at the signage here. Pratt & Whitney sign, Cessna, Piper. Yeah, that's nice signage. I know you don't get a lot of that when you are watching on the video screen, but I hope you had just a little tinge of the enjoyment that I had today. Let's put the airplane right here next to this low-wing aircraft. Parking brake on. Avionics off. Get all these lights off. Leave the beacon on for right now. Trim is set for takeoff. Fuel tanks are both. Mixture is full rich. Let's pull the mixture. Kill the engine. Beacon can come off. Magnetos can come off. And the master switch can come off. Interesting how I pulled the mixture and the magnetos and the engine still kept running. It didn't die until the master switch was killed. Okay, we're going to shut off the fuel cutoff valve here on the bottom. We will take one final look at our machine from the outside. I did not raise the flaps. I wonder if I can do that with the power. I can't do it with the power off. That was a mistake. Anyway, what an enjoyable flight. Great to be in Fargo, and hope you, the police were with me when I took off, and now here the police are with me again. Hope you folks found enjoyment out of that, and I hope to see you again soon.